Good morning, Trumptopia. A special segment of the Almost Daily Zencast. Hosted by the incorrigible Mr. Zeppo. Let's talk Trump.
Hello, and welcome back to another spiraling, rambling, genuine, unorthodox, unscripted, unpaid for, 100% authentic broadcast. Coming live, direct from the center of my brain, I am your humble host, the incorrigible Mr. Zeppo. Here we are, folks. This feels solidly today like the last 48 hours has been the transition. The last 48 hours has been the blackout on the end of Scene 1 of Act 2 of the Trumptopia saga, with the Mueller report and all the blowback and pontificating and declarations of absolute and total vindication and the 15 or 14 ongoing criminal investigations into our dear old orange President Trump's behavior. And now, with the rise of a fresh scene, transitions have been made, new trajectories are being set, and a fluster of transitional flag waving has begun, and here we go. It's off to the races. The 2020 election madness has officially begun. It's been ramping up for quite a bit, mind you, and I haven't been trying to ignore it. I've just been wicked busy, and as I kind of eased back into doing this show on the, quote, almost daily, I wanted to knock out a bunch of crazy abstract thoughts first. All right, so if you're new, welcome to the show. If you're confused, hang tight, stick with me, the story gets crazier. If you've only listened to 1 or 2 episodes, I humbly encourage you to jump around, check out the different segments, and know that one of them sort of stitches them all together in my crazy mind, and I'll leave it to you to pick which one you think it is. I digress. Here we are, and Joe Biden has officially announced, and all of that typical and yet now newly heightened infighting, which is going to be, primarily focused on the DNC this year instead of the RNC. And what an interesting sort of almost counterbalance phenomena that there's, I think, if I'm not mistaken, 20 Democrats and or pseudo-Democrats running for office. Sanders is technically still not a Democrat, right? Like, he's running with them on the ballot. He's trying to get on their ballot, but I think he's still technically an independent somehow. I don't know. I gotta double check that. Also, for anyone who has not heard me with my litany of disclaimers, please forgive me. This is sort of like an opinion talk show, and it's operating at only like 1/3 of its fullest potential. This is indeed a show that was originally envisioned as having 3 co-hosts and routine guests and stuff. I have not had the opportunity to manifest all that, but things are in the works. So if it sounds like I'm just rambling at myself, and you'd like to hear that fuller version, help a podcaster out. You don't need to give me money. I haven't ever done that. I don't think I will do that just yet. But you can always help by liking, sharing, commenting. Give us your thoughts, your comments, your feedbacks. Haters will be welcomed as much as supporters, although violent hate speech will not be tolerated. But critics and those who disagree are welcome to pull up a chair. In its fullest form, I hope one day to present a show or a series of shows that are really more about conversation instead of just me rambling on in wacky spirals. But here we are. The Democratic Party's and I love this because it applies, right? I called the Democratic Party's preliminary grouping of candidates a clusterfuck clown car of GOP silly. And this year, the Democrats, not to be outdone or perhaps following some kind of unconscious pattern building intuitive thing, it is a clusterfucky clown car of way too many Democrats. And we're going to get into who's exactly officially running in just a moment, so it isn't just me rambling off. There's a great website we're going to peek at. But I wanted to sort of touch on the theme that I created with the topic of the show, or the description of the show. And that's that the Democrats are gearing up for fight, and thusly prompting much opportunity for internal division. Now, we saw with the GOP's build-up to allowing Trump to get the nomination back in the day. Back in the good old days when Russia wasn't hacking our elections every season. Although at that point they already were, right? And I get it, you all. They weren't literally hacking the actual election systems, although some evidence indicates they might have been probing that. Of course, that all could be completely fabricated fake news by the CIA and Mossad, or whoever the fuck is the trifecta of alphabet soup agencies orchestrating all of this. Who knows, right? I'm not pretending to know the absolutely, truly correct answer. I'm here to question and to look at things from a sort of centrist point of view, because ultimately, and my centrist point of view is slightly different than the typical standard stereotypical centrist point of view. My centrism is sort of linked to humanism and, of course, also to transcendentalism, which is, if you've got a preconceived notion of those words, or you don't know what those words are, hang tight. I get into them in some past episodes, and I will, I'm sure, revisit them in future episodes. But here we are. I think there's an interesting duality, mutually arising dichotomy thing going on between the two parties, right? The Democratic Party is going to put on its shining white armor, its brilliant big white cowboy hat, and ride out towards the sunset and tell America, one of these 20 knuckleheads is going to save you from the big bad orange wolf, and everything will be great. And as I've said before, and I'll try to keep it short this time, we must remember, because we are now so immersed in Trumptopia era hyper news cycle thinking, we must remember that the old normal, and I'm not talking about the bring America back to whatever the GOP wants, and I'm not necessarily adhering to whatever the Democrats want either, but in general terms, as just average Joe Schmo citizens of this country, the old quote-unquote normal, the glory days of Trump and Biden, and whoever the fuck was right before them, because we don't remember anymore, right? The order, who cares? Our whole lives, in other words, the normalcy that we now fondly and nostalgically long for, of growing up from, from Nixon to now, that normal was still pretty Trumptopian, yo. And here's what I mean. And here, for those who haven't heard me talk about it, although I think I talk about it too much, here's why I call the show Good Morning Trumptopia. And then we'll get to all the 2020 stuff. Trump is not the cause of the madness that we're living through. Trump is just the living avatar, exemplar, the literal and figurative and esoteric sort of quasi-cosmic mystical poster child for everything that's wrong with humanity. And we always get these examples. The human organism is exploring diversity in form, right? We are a life form. And as I've said in other places, life is one unity expressing an infinite multitude of form. Thus, every life form is in and of itself, let us say each species is in and of itself exploring the diversity of range of expression given its framework in that particular vessel, that particular form that has been engineered and explored and fractally unfolded, organically developed in the biochemistry lab of living nature. And we are one such of those experiments, okay? Now, I know that this is a really weird sounding take on everything. And I know that I often address new listeners. My hope is to attract new listeners, welcome them, and help them get oriented to the show. And as much as my show is unscripted, I think there's an organic flow that builds. I am myself a very fractal person. And so there's like a recursion of increasing complexity. But then sometimes I just spiral out of control and ramble like a crazy person. So I apologize to you guys. That's the need for co-hosts, right? Co-hosts would help me adhere to a higher order of structure. Because one person's creativity is amazing and brilliant on their own. And I do believe in the advice of do what you can, start where you are. Here I am, right? Thus, here we are. But I also know that as in many esoteric sources, spiritually speaking, the same is true creatively. Then when two or more people gather and focus around the same creative objectives, the creativity flows better. And that also works in the opposite direction, because all things are yin-yang interconnected, right? Yin-yang is a symbol for a very deep function of the universe. And I mean that in a sort of mathematical sense. But let's spiral back out to Trumptopia and this idea of not being the cause, but a symptomology, right? In a recent episode, I said politicians become like giant parabolic mirrors. They concentrate and focus the community that has put them in power, and then reflect like a weird, inside-out, grotesque image back. Is that crazy sounding? Yeah, because we've had some horrible, tyrannical, dictatorly type rulers throughout history. And is it fair to say that all of the plebes of humanity, all of the sheeple, they're all horrible, tyrannical? No. Now, there's a sort of metaphoric, esoteric matrix there that's hard to describe, but rather this symptomology is of the darkest side of our collective. But our collective, of course, is itself a broad range of expression of all that is possible. Okay? So, this has been building within us for a very long time, and it can quickly seem depressing, dystopic, and even sort of end-of-the-worldish. But the brilliant thing, as the same evidence that points to this sort of esoteric, and I'll agree it's sort of pseudoscientific because I personally don't have the tools to get very rigorously scientific about it. But we as a species do. One of my enthusiastic points is that what I'm trying to call out is why aren't we applying the highest cutting edge of sciences in an even more intense, aggressive, but open-minded, investigation into this direction of how we could understand ourselves. So I submit to you, my friends, that what I'm trying to say is not as dark and morbid as it might seem at first. There is also simultaneously this expression of, within the range of all the possible expressions of what a human might be, the expression of this profound antithesis to the darkness and the craziness and the maniacalness and the ego drive to control and acquire power and amass fortune and utilize those in an oppressive way in order to perpetuate this addiction, this negative addiction. There are brilliant, shining examples in the opposite direction. Because humanity as a whole always has it within its potentiality to express this full range. So, and this expression is not limited to individual examples, right? Like, I'm not saying that someone like Trump is absolute evil and someone like Gandhi is absolute good. That's not true. Within every individual example, from the most saintly saint to the most grotesque of the truly vile who commit the most horrific of crimes, one hard truth to, we can comprehend it, but we don't want to acknowledge it. We don't want to accept it. It offends our sensibilities. It makes us face a difficult truth and a very challenging call to do some work that is yucky and we don't want to do, which is that, like, even the worst of the worst are humans, right? They are brothers and sisters in our human species and are as worthy of healing, forgiveness, redemption, growth, transformation as any of us feel we ourselves might be. We ourselves are not absolutely good or absolutely evil. We ourselves are complicated, very confusing individuals, riddled with brilliant goodness and also the innate ability to talk ourselves into doing the dumbest and most horrible things, all within, the expression of the range of what our life is like. What does it have to do with politics? Some people might ask, when I take a big, huge, divergent tangent like that. Well, let me put it to you this way. There's a lot of ideological debate about what should be done to solve the problems, right? To solve the problems of politics, to solve the problems of corruption in politics, to solve the problem of Donald Trump himself. Well, one thing I'm urging us all to do is to pause, to take a big chill breath, a chill pill moment, although I love that phrase, but I don't like that phrase because a chill pill necessitates a big pharmaceutical corporation producing literal chill pills. And as we all know, due to decades of reporting, and this is funny because it synergizes, there was a really great article, I think on NPR yesterday, I forget what show, but it was one of the ones I caught on the drive home from my day job, about Big Pharma and the confluence of history now with Big Pharma actually being, individuals responsible within the Big Pharma industry being prosecuted and treated like common street drug dealers. And while it kind of, I have to begrudgingly give it some of these victories, I have to begrudgingly give some room for Trump fans to go, oh, yay, Trump, see, he's really doing great things. Some of these things are things that there's been a groundswell and movement towards achieving, both within the American public, in that place that transcends any of the ideological convention. Ooh, I did not do my warm-ups today. Right? Ideology separates us, but then certain problems transcend that and tend to unite us. And the pharmaceutical addiction epidemic and the realization that Big Pharma does indeed treat us worse than your average street drug dealer in as much as that they are yielding bazillion times more profits and then rubbing it in our faces and normalizing it in our culture in a way that we would not tolerate from common thugs dealing drugs in the street, right? But yet we kind of almost glorify them. There's been an awakening in that front on many levels. And this synergizes with another point, which I'll get to in a hot second, which is Trump's hypocrisy and how he's expressed it in regards to the vax and anti-vax argument. But I digress. So many things, topics today. I really thought I was going to just sit and talk about 2020 election madness, but obviously everything's interconnected. So where was I going? What was I talking about? Talking about spiraling out of control. I just did it. Well, when I review, remix, and reboot this episode sometime later this summer, I'll hopefully connect dots a little bit better here. But I wanted to bring it back to my opening statements, right? So Trump Team Trump, at all the levels, is celebrating the supposed victories of total exoneration, which, by the way, flat out lie. The Mueller report literally says that these investigations refuse to exonerate the president at this time. We just also will not bring any criminal charges at this time because of the standing, and I've talked about this at length in a recent episode, right? The standing rule to not indict a sitting president. Which brings me to a post from a few months ago that people dismissed. Is American democracy really just sort of short-term temporary kingship? Because if you can't indict a sitting president, if you can't bring criminal charges, other than to trigger the impeachment jury trial scenario, as we just discussed in what was it, yesterday's episode? Then essentially, people like Trump will, of course, try to get into office and then act with impunity because the DOJ's probably not going to prosecute or even try to bring anything to trial. And the DOJ doesn't start the impeachment process, right? As we discussed yesterday thoroughly, we understand who starts the impeachment process and then who follows up that process with an actual criminal prosecution. It's all bifurcated. It's supposed to be checks and balances. Which brings me back to my big point that rubs everybody in all parties the wrong way. The argument between the left and the right and the third parties that are bickering in the spectrum and, caught in the gap between those two extremes is engineered to a certain degree. To connect with my talk about organized religions, no offense to organized religion participants, you are victims, my friends, of this, just like political party status enthusiasts. Y'all are victims. I was a victim of this, my friends. They condition us to think that there's a fight to be fought. And then they tell us that this group is the righteous one and this group's going to win that fight. And then they get you to fight your fellow human beings. They get you to fight your neighbors and family. They get you to fight your own fellow countrymen and women. Americans, and zooming back into this particular echo chamber here, the American echo chamber of echo chambers is successfully getting the American public to hate other Americans over how to be an American. How's about scratching your head, patting your tummy, I can't even pronounce it, such a tongue twister, patting your head, rubbing your tummy, poking yourself in the eye with a sharp stick and your neighbor all at once. Like, what? The thing that I want to just sort of end that sidebar on is that this is supposed to be the United States of America, and its number one ideological hobby is pitting itself against itself oftentimes over things that can't even really be solved through fighting, that no amount of fighting will resolve. So, zooming back, in terms of our political situation right now, one of the things that I think, I was talking about normalcy, right? The normalcy that we long for right now in this current moment of clusterfuck chaos, of ever-increasing craziness. we must never forget that that normal was corrupt AF at the time. All right? Okay. The general purpose of political theater is to distract those enamored with the political process from something deeper, darker, and more nefarious. Now, there's a whole spectrum of theories about what's going on. And quite honestly, I think most of them miss the point. Because there's one thing that makes even more sense than a nefarious plot to destroy ourselves. And that's a nefarious plot to make us fear that we are about to destroy ourselves so that we live in fear and don't understand how to heal ourselves. Now, let me put this one statement down, and it's something that my social media acquaintances, and I don't know why I draw so many Trump supporters that want to be my friend, other than they suppose they're going to somehow win me over with their posts. But Trump, and this is a controversial statement both to the left and the right. Trump himself is one massive distraction. Been saying this from the beginning. A clusterfuck of fail to push the pendulum to a new extreme. Okay? And pushing the pendulum is the thing we're not noticing. Now, what's the pendulum? The pendulum is extremity in our ideological conflict behavior, in my humble opinion. Let's pause and zoom out. If you had to pick one statement that describes the state of the world in terms of its countries and its political situations in the governments of all those countries, what would it be? Let that percolate, but I'll tell you what I would say, that there's an ever-growing momentum towards more overt oppression. And I choose the term more overt because the corruption of oppressive tendencies has never really truly been absent. You cannot point to any era where there wasn't an oppressive corruption expressing oppressive tendencies in any political cultural history between here and the Tower of Babel. Prove me wrong. A lot of people, this whole nostalgia, this whole nonsensical political nostalgia in the United States that really effectively works on both parties in terms of the immediate American democracy, left-right, false dichotomy paradigm, is this nostalgia of a slightly better time from a slightly more insert your favorite ideological model here era, where that ideological model was more prevalent or more in control of things or more unified in its expression in the culture, and that we have to work towards that. Now, the progressives, they just refocus that nostalgia to an idealization of some future trajectory, right? Like, and I'm not trying to piss people off. I'm trying to analyze the ideology itself. I'm not judging the individuals. I love people of every ideological construct, not for their ideologies, but for being people, yo. We have always been each other. I'm sure I did an episode about that, and if not, I'll do one soon. But we have always been each other statement. So put a pin in it. Let's digress. Reeling it back. Here we are. Now, for a lot of young people, it can get a little bit frustrating to be told what an election is or how an election works when they are formulating their own. And young people today, and huzzah for this, kudos for this, bless your heart, not in the dismissive Southern way, but in the legitimate spiritual way, bless you for being as cynical and as critical of power and power structures. But because that's how you should be, right? Like, let's remember, question everything. But also question your position from which you are questioning. If you question everything with a democratic default paradigm as your starting place, you're not going to be as likely to question problematic issues in the Democratic Party as strongly, or especially if they're subtle, right? Or they're easily overlooked. But the political echo chambers function in such a way that they rely on a sort of righteousness of us and lack of righteousness in them. And the reason I work on calling that out in all paradigms so much is because it's one of the more subtle and more difficult to detect indoctrinations, because it's omnipresent and it's very, very, very good friends with ego. It's so cozy. It's where who do you think really crafted that kind of thinking? We are the good guys, and you're either with us or against us, right? Anybody can feel that way. How do you think that those who fall into the mindset of radical violence, regardless of which echo chamber it's pretending to represent, but whenever someone, no matter the context, no matter the mechanisms by which they got seduced into choosing radical ideologically motivated violence, strip past all the noise about how they got there. Now just think about them being there. Anybody, abstractly thinking, in theoretical, right? Like, to be convinced that your next move needs to be violence, and that the reasons are this ideology, this ideology, this ideology, or rather these ideological tenets, right? This ideological tenet of my ideological structure, whether overtly stated or not, in order for all of that thinking to work, there has to be this implicit like assumption that this ideological structure, the community, or the isolated ideological network, wherever it stems from, is righteous. This is righteousness. My cause, whether it's just them alone in their own individual created cause, or more broadly, whether they are loner or not, there's some affiliation to or extension of an established or existing political ideological structure, right? And that this cause is righteous and all others are not. The problem is, when I really began to investigate this, I had to stop and go, okay, what is righteousness? What is righteousness? I'm going to have to put a pin in this and make this another episode in the future, but let me tell you what. One thing I can say really quickly and very effectively, I think, is that it doesn't seem to exist in nature. If you strip aside all ideological conditioning and or assumptions about what nature should be, and you just look around and you just observe nature, there is no expression of righteousness. Not in the sense that it is used in this programming that I'm talking about. And yet, people cling to it. People use it as a source of power in order to impact other people against their will. And here we are. So, if Trump is a distraction and not really fighting against the system, like I said, that rubs everybody in all parties the wrong way. It pisses off the Trump base because they're convinced that he's fighting the system. But how many more examples do you need? The most recent one that just came across my desk is the vaccination concern. Now, I know that I could be wrong, but there has been the appearance that the anti-vaxxer movement is somewhat popular amongst the Trump base. Now, it cuts across all political lines. There's a lot of people everywhere that are like jumping on that bandwagon. But for the Trump people in particular, I'm wondering, where is the outrage, right? Before the election, he was a vocal anti-vaxxer. And, there's plenty of his tweets to verify that. What's he doing right now? He's telling people to get the measles vaccine with zero recognition of the fact that he was previously really radically critical of big pharma and vaccines. That's his MO. That is absolutely central to how he works. Mexico's going to pay for the wall. What happened? Right? I'm the only one who can make a nuclear deal with North Korea. Oh, really? Womp womp. Where's that deal? What happened? 2 meetings and nothing but like funny-faced pictures of them both looking disgruntled with each other. Who is swooping in like some sort of superhero to like play the game of like, see, I'm not a bad guy. I'm going to solve this problem that Trump can't solve. Oh, for those who don't know, like this just in the last, I think, 3 or 4 days, Kim Jong-il, oh God, I'm terrible at names, but the ridiculously fashionable tyrannical leader of North Korea, Kim Jong-un, right? That's his name? Oh, I'm such a terrible... I would make a terrible journalist, that's for sure. I would have to be just like the talking bobblehead at the anchor desk, because they give you... I could totally ask people to what I want researched, because I got questions, man. But I need a staff to just be like, here's the people and their names. And you were wrong about this idea, but you were right about these things. Okay, cool. Anyways, so, I mean, I've been saying from the beginning that slowly but surely, the Trump base is going to be blockaded, cornered into a corner of self-realization by the overwhelming evidence of Trump's own actions, of Trump's own words, right? And the obvious conflict that happened. I mean, I thought that one of the earliest bits that was just like, really? You guys aren't outraged about this? Was his really ridiculous claim to have absolutely zero connections to Russia during the race up to the election. Because just within the last year or so, his own organization had been touting their business ties to Russia. It's like, it wasn't you couldn't even call it an open secret, right? And how did this not go viral? I made this meme. Trump, with the quote, denying any connections to Russia, and then both of Trump's, sons bragging about connections to Russia in like publicly confirmed. These aren't fake news stories. Like, this shit was before the Russia even became an issue. They were bragging about it. Okay? I thought that would be like that before the election, and I thought that would really tear off a lot of fan from the base. And I guess some people did indeed sort of lose it right then and be like, whoa, I can't. But more people than I expected stuck with him. And now, here we are, like I said, beginning of Act 2, and Trump team is not only celebrating a bunch of false victories, and you can't even call it spin. They're just fabricating their own reality about the Mueller report and demanding that it manifest, right? And also already preemptively, self-assuredly patting themselves on the back about a foreseeable landslide victory in 2020. Right. So, what is to be done? What is to be done? right? Well, I've always thought that it's a twofold response, maybe even a threefold response that one must engage in. And people always presume that forgiveness is absent of accountability, and that's not true. So, forgiveness, accountability, transformative healing. How do we implement that strategically in regards to politics? I humbly suggest to you that we need to implement and strive to integrate a grassroots movements of incorporating this kind of thinking, this kind of approach into political discourse, right? How does politics work? I mean, and of course, my discussion here is limited to the United States example. And for anybody listening internationally, I just humbly ask you to translate into your own politics terms my kinds of suggestions and the kinds of commentary I'm making. But here in the United States, politics definitely waves a big pretend flag about being of the people, for the people, by the people. Now, the irony is that all that lip service to that is not just malicious misrepresentation. It's a little bit deeper than that. Like, it really has to, or in the past at any rate, as a system of governance being encroached upon by corruption with tendencies towards control and oppression. At the unconscious level, I suspect that the American experiment in quote-unquote capitalist democracy is an experiment in like nesting into control, and thus must always strive to appear to live up to its ideal standards of, life, liberty, and whatever the fuck it is, and and to the nostalgic mythology that it creates about its own establishment in terms of being a government. And I don't want to go. I never want to be perceived as incorrectly in my anti-government statements. I am sort of anti-establishment. I also just recognize that what we need is civic organization. And so while I'm wary of the notion of, fixing the system from within, and a lot of people are really cynical of that suggestion, I also totally think that has to be part of the solution. But the solution isn't just that, right? Like, we can try to bring a responsible, positive, progressive, thoughtful, insert all your favorite qualities here, person into the political foray. But ultimately, the incursion of corruption is so systematic and subtle, and not quite what people think it is, because one of the things it does is perpetually spit out misinformation about itself to keep everybody distracted and busy arguing about the nature of the corruption instead of actually standing up to it. That when well-intentioned people get involved in politics, ultimately they are exposing themselves to deeper and deeper risk of succumbing to that corruption. Okay. So, what am I proposing? I think that the larger step is that we, the resistance that's so if there's a Venn diagram of like political involvement, there's, the statist set of circles, people who are involved in statism in a sort of, they believe in it, they have faith in it, and they cling to it. And I don't mean those as negative judgments. Those, I was once like that. I was once like that about the state and about organized religion. There's also the circles over there in this other very complex, multiple dimensioned Venn diagram of those who don't participate, right? And then there's the Venn diagram of the collective of folks who are spiritual in some way. Now, in the nexus of those three, there's a triangular overlap that creates, I'm not sure, I'd have to do the actual graphing out of it, but some really beautiful, sophisticated geometric shape that represents the overlapping and sort of convergent nexus of where we could, I might humbly suggest, implement a sort of spiritual people's, political people's movement of connecting. Now, don't get me wrong, I'm a fervent supporter of the separation of church and state. Now, ironically, there is in fact a very subversive and establishment sort of movement to eradicate that, because the church and the state really do like working together to control the way the population thinks. Don't believe me? Well, look at the last 3,000 or 4,000 years of history. 6,000 years will give you a really good comparison, because then you get into history before Christianity. People make so many biased assumptions about Christianity in both directions, in all directions. But when you can see the history of peoples before there was ever even a Christianity, and see that religions, spiritual movements grow, become religions, become organized religions, and then suddenly the state and the organized religion are either in conflict or are working hand in hand to oppress the people. We've lived through this nonsense so many times, especially once you take into account all the erased history. I digress. 2020 is one of those years, in all the ways that you could analyze it. It's a massive convergence of opportunity. All right? My spidey senses are tingling. All the probability waveform functions that could converge are preliminarily, I can never pronounce that word correctly in the flow of things. They are doing their preliminary probe of the convergence point. And what convergence point am I pointing to? Because there are obviously many alternative points of convergence in probability waveform function in and out flow, or infolding and outfolding. And if I've lost you, check out the other episodes where I talk about sacred geometry and how it relates to how the universe works. But if I haven't lost you, stick with me. It gets weirder. Or it gets more sophisticated and complex. Call me crazy. You won't be the first. But I think that we are right now in this moment today, as you're listening to this show, and as you have the opportunity to help others listen to this show, well positioned. And I speak to those who consider themselves spiritual and to those who don't, to experiment and explore the possibility of using spiritual tools to help, as a spiritual vote, to help manifest the outcome that would really truly be the greatest good for this country, that country, humanity at all, right? As American politicians love to say, regardless of political echo chamber, they love to say that for whatever reasons, America is a sort of leader of the world. It's the, the president is often, the office of the president. And that's a whole other episode of discussion, right, folks? One of the things that tyranny loves to do is conflate the office of a democracy with the individual fulfilling that office. Trump does that really hard to himself, which is going to cause him problems with Don McGahn if Don McGahn is a person of good conscience. Did I name the right person? The White House lawyer, who is the lawyer for the office of the presidency, not the president's personal lawyer. There's a whole episode there, right? Put a pin in that shit. I digress. 2020, if we so choose, my friends, can be a pivotal moment of radical network grassroots spiritual work towards trying to, in the equal opposite response to the negative interference by whomever is ultimately responsible, with the obvious negative interference being deployed in all of the echo chambers, we can be we can build a grassroots network spiritual army of positive influence, of positive energy being interacted with by those participating in this democracy. And how will that help? Well, we can do 3-4 episodes on how I think that would work. But I intended to, and I promised a quick discussion and overview of those who are. And so instead of going on a long tirade about how this would work, I'm just going to start showing my example of what could be done. So, real quick, first of all, accountability, right? This president, who very recently, and very ironically, I think he was being facetious as fuck inside when he said this, is like, I'm the most transparent president in history. No, you're not, buddy. How many of your supporters really understand how much taxpayer money you are blowing? Okay? How much disclosure does his team give about how much he costs the American taxpayer as a person abusing and neglecting the institution of the presidency? And mind you, I'm not a statist, but if we're going to all live together and work with a statist system, well, then I'm going to give it some minimal due respect when it works correctly and hold it accountable when it doesn't, and try to push it to work in a more holistic and of the, for the best good of all the people kind of way, without imposing any imposition of like spiritual ideology, because I'm anti-ideology. So the president that is the most transparent president has very much failed to inform his constituency of how much his golf trips cost. And I haven't looked at this in a while, but there is what I understand to believe, verified third-party, independent, non-biased website by the name of TrumpGolfCount.com. And I believe that there was a similar one for Obama. I haven't double-checked that, though, and I really should for a future episode just to do a comparison moment. But as of right now, I'm looking at it right now. Today's Friday, April 26th at 1:11 p.m. Ooh, I wish I had the seconds on the clock. I'd probably, when I looked up at it, I bet it was all ones. Cool. Hold on a second. I got to ding a bell. All right. I'm a crazy person, I know. Okay, so as of right now, according to TrumpGolfCount.com, and forgive me if I'm wrong, and they are really biased and they're horribly corrupt and they're owned by the Clintons or some dumb thing. And don't get me started about the Clinton-Trump connection, okay? Trump supporters, they were friends for like 50 years. I mean, like my whole life, I knew them as socialite equals that hung out at each other's parties and gave each other money. How do you not understand that has as much to do with why people don't like Trump as anything Russia might have done? Okay, I digress. According to Take 17, according to TrumpGolfCount.com, and they don't pay me to make a commercial. This is just me being ridiculous about how I'm going to read their page. And by the way, they have a delightfully kind of almost grotesquely funny picture of Trump. And I'm not into humiliating any human individual, but when people serve it up about themselves, whatever. And humor, as long as it's not too horribly mean, can be cathartic and can be part of holding people accountable. But I digress. According to this website, the cost to the American Trumpopian taxpayers is $99 million and counting. $99 million bill so that this guy can go play golf 170 times since his inauguration. Where's the outrage, folks? Where is the Republican outrage? As you scroll down on this particular website, there's a section of it that says just the facts, just the real facts. and with a link to join their Facebook page. Ooh, there's a comparison. Who plays golf more? Trump versus Obama week by week outings. Visits likely confirmed. Okay, Obama has a green line, right? And it is the smallest, like, arc being graphed on the graph. It's the lowest bar, the lowest goofy line on the so that you can see it. The left-hand side, that axis is outings, and the scale is 0, 10, 20, it's intense. It goes all the way up to 180. And then the bottom, the horizon trajectory is weeks since inauguration. Obviously 0, 15, 30, 45, 60, 75, 90, 105. So by the end of the graph, Obama looks like he's at somewhere between 60 and 70 outings, right? So let's round it to the nearest middle point, and let's call it 65 golf outings by the end of the graph, which is more than 105 weeks. Looks like probably if they didn't put a number right at the end of the graph, but if they had, it would probably be like 200. No, not 200. More like 150, maybe 125, somewhere in there, in the low hundreds weeks. So 60 something, 65. Okay, confirmed for Trump is a line above that, and it peaks at 75 or 80. I think that might actually literally be right on the 80 line. Yeah, right on the 80 line. It's a little small graph. It's kind of hard to see. And you can go visit it at trumpgolfcount.com. The likely line is even higher, and that climbs steep across the graph and peaks out at 130, I think. And then the actual total visits, where they could not confirm, but he went to the golf course, he went to Mar-a-Lago, or a resort, of his, and or I'm not sure. Trump total visits to golf clubs. Yeah, that's how they limited it, right? Trump likely playing golf. Trump confirmed playing golf, and Obama played golf. I really wish they had all four of the same type of lines for Obama, because it'd be great to know the total visits of golf clubs, where Obama was not confirmed to have played golf, but he might have, right? It'd be cool to know. But Trump's total peaks the chart at 175, almost breaking 180. Also on this site, and then we'll drop this site for now, fun stats. Days Trump has spent in Mar-a-Lago, 91. Cost of flights to Mar-a-Lago, 24 so far. $47,288,000. Days Trump has spent at Bedminster, another one of his, I think it's one of his places, right? 58. Cost of flight to Bedminster, 19 flights so far. 14,392,000. Okay, you can see how quickly it got to 99 million and growing. So, boom. What a fun fact. Wow, I've already killed a whole hour. I'm going to have to, I guess, break this up into two-parter just so that it isn't crazy, stupid long all in one go. So, where am I going with this, and what are we going to talk about in part 2? 2020. I'd love to hear a serious numerology take on what 2020 means, but it's a cool number. It's a palindrome. It is a moment in time that we have some direct, immediate historical nostalgia to sort of like go, it's the 20s. Remember the Roaring 20s? Cool. It's going to be a crazy election, all right? I switched really quick. I'm going to drag this out to maybe to a full. Well, I got 10 more minutes till it's an hour. So according to, again, another page that appears, but might not be, forgive me if I'm wrong, but appears to be nonpartisan and about the facts. If anybody's got hardcore proof that they're like totally jerry-rigged, great. And then forgive me for using them as a reference. But they appear to be nonpartisan. No one involved with this website, to the best of my knowledge, is paying me, because no one besides my day job pays me anything. Okay? So here we go. This website is called Ballotpedia. Ballotpedia.org. So, cool, it's a .org. It might even be a real nonprofit. But according to them, I'm on their presidential elections page, Road to the White House. The 2020 presidential election. According to this website, as of right now, as a formally announced and I think registered candidates, there are 21 Democrats and 2 Republicans. Now, I know there are more than 2 Republicans that are being bantied about on the Republican side of the echo chamber system. But apparently, according to this website, most of them have not actually officially registered, even if they're already considered in on the race. So obviously Trump is one of the 2 Republicans running. The second Republican is Bill Weld, which I have not heard of. And there's a link on his name, so we'll maybe check him out for a future episode. But 21 Democrats. And the consensus that I've seen in the last 48 hours worth of news cycling is that, and the immediate days before Joe Biden formally announced, leading up to his pre-announce, he was assumed by everybody on the left to be the front runner should he announce. And that's been actually true since God knows when, since the very beginning of beginnings, since before any Democrat announced. I'm fairly certain I've heard Democratic talking heads saying that the moment, should he drop his name in the hat, he would be the presumptive frontrunner. According to Ballotpedia, he is. Although I don't know how they're listing them, and I don't know what their categories are because they've got the Republican mixed in. But here's the list according to this website of everybody officially and formally with all their registered who are running for president at this point in time. Joe Biden, Cory Booker, Pete Buttigieg, I don't know how to pronounce his name. Forgive me. I also think it's cute and funny. And he said, I heard him say on the radio, I think, he says that people have said that if you just say Buddha and judge, you get really close. And that's something he said his whole life, which is weird and interesting and quirky. And if you're into synergy and stuff like Buddha judge, there's some analysis worth rendering there. What does that mean? But I digress. I don't think he's Buddhist, right? He's a really big, some sort of non-denominational Christian, or I don't know what brand of Christian, but he's Christian, and he's already getting into tussles with Christian leadership on the right, saying that he can't be gay and Christian and gay. That's a whole other episode. Let's put a pin in that. Julian Castro, Democrat, right? And Latino. Woohoo. A well-spoken gentleman. I'm not going to make a commentary on everybody because that'll take an hour. John Delaney, Tulsi Gabbard. I don't know much about her, but I'm sort of not into her vibe. John Delaney, don't know enough to comment. Kristen Gillibrand, same. Don't know enough about her. Forgive me. Horrible, right? What a horrible feminist ally I am. I don't know enough about these 2 women. Mike Gravel, never heard his name. Kamala Harris, I mostly like, but there's a few things I'm not sure about. And I don't know how she would respond to, let's say, a spiritual constituency. And that's ultimately my calling, folks. But I'll get to that once I read everybody's names off. John Hickenlooper, goofy name. I would change that. I'm not judging the guy, but man, I would not enjoy calling myself that. I would change that. Way too many dick jokes and sex jokes and inappropriate sounding jokes right there. And trust me, I say that as a person who was victimized by people who looked at my name, which is long and in a foreign language, and made all kinds of horrible jokes based on some of the constructions they could extract from its consonants, but whatever. Jay Inslee, never heard of them. Amy Klobuchar, generally like her. Wayne Messam, never heard of them. Seth Moulton, don't know. Beto O'Rourke. As a white Mexican, I can appreciate a gringo that's honorarily a Mexican, right? That's like the inverse of a white Mexican. He's Mexican, but honorarily on the outside, he's American on the inside. He's a white Irish guy on the inside. I think it's weird, and here's a whole question. I don't know enough. I'd really have to do some research into this, but if he's registered on all the ballots as Beto. Did he legally change his name? Because I know for a fact that that's the nickname, right? Like, he had lots of Latino friends growing up. He grew up in a Latino community, and people called him Beto. Because that's, like, my brother's nickname is Beto. It's pronounced Beto. Not Beto, not Badao. People pronounce the shit wrong like crazy and it drives me nuts. I digress. So he's charming and cool. I love that meme about him being a punk rocker or wearing some sort of heavy metal t-shirt or sweater or something. I don't remember what it was, but it made me giggle. And whatevs. I still do, like, up front, folks, how much do you know about any of their platforms, right? Like, I haven't looked into it yet because I like to let them expose themselves to me. And also, well, there's a whole bunch of other things about elections and me pontificating about elections that we'll get into in a future episode. Trying to wrap this up, folks, because we're already past an hour. Here we go. So, Beto O'Rourke, gotta look into him more, but yeah, cool. The Mexicans like him. Tim Ryan, don't know anything. Bernie Sanders. I want to revisit the whole conspiracy theory. Did Bernie Sanders get physically violent? Violently threatened. That he received violent threats from within to make him sort of conform to the whole, remember that the Democrats jerry-rigged the primaries to make Hillary win? Question mark? Problem? Because I love him to death, and on the surface, he's way up the right alley. We need a woman that's as aggressively, quote-unquote, as socialist as him. Gonna do a whole episode on socialism, folks. And speaking of which, much more professionally than I ever could, there was, I do believe just yesterday, a really great commentary piece on NPR or one of the affiliate public radio stations by a gentleman, a journalist, fake news, but he like really broke it down. What socialism was, how the right has dealt with it and reactionarily used it for fear-mongering, and how they're capitalizing on people's total lack of understanding of what it is on paper, what it's been in action, and how they reframe it and use it against anybody that tries to stand with that label. Totally worth taking a listen to. I bet you can find it over on npr.org or one of the related websites to that whole network of public radio. By the way, folks, if you are wary of the media, and I could be wrong about this as always, right? But to the best of my understanding, the public radio network system in America is as close to a truly of the people, for the people, by the people, as free of corruption as it possibly can be kind of media outlet. Unless I'm totally wrong, and they're really great at bullshitting me. But to the best of my ability to look into it, they really are sort of driven by the public. And while they do get non-public funding from, charitable organizations, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera, they really try to do a big pay firewall, like the control firewall of like who controls the content and who controls the gathering and raising of money for them to operate. Okay, anyways, blah, 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 blah. Whoever that guy was, because I'm terrible at names, and I usually, when I have a reference to a thing I heard on the radio and I don't have a name, it's because I was driving, folks, and I'm driving, so I'm just going to listen to it and do my best. I'm not going to try and write it down. So go to one of those websites, check it out, because it's really worth taking a listen to. To the best of my understanding, his opinion is legit. Like, again, always could be wrong. So returning back to the list here, we got Bernie Sanders, all kinds of interesting questions about what happened last time around and where he's at. And of course now he's actually a millionaire, or maybe he's even a billionaire, I forget. But like as he's been saying in his adorable, grumpy old man way, when you write a book and it sells really good, you make a bunch of money. Is that money encroaching corruption into him, or is he standing strong in his own way with the spiritual strength, regardless of whatever his spiritual ideology might be? Does he have the inherent spiritual strength to resist the corruption? And also, like, what the fuck happened? And what was up with that one picture where was that Photoshop, or did he really have a little bruisey cut on his face right after he was accused of taking a dive? I don't know. Let's look into it. Future episodes. Okay, continuing. Eric Swalwell. I'm not sure how to pronounce that. Swalwell. A Democrat. Never heard of him. Sorry. Donald Trump. We all know what's up with that, and my opinion on that guy. Elizabeth Warren. I thought last time around, I really honestly thought that if Elizabeth Warren and Bernie Sanders teamed up, they would do better than Hillary Clinton. Okay? And as right now, this is my 2020 kickoff show. And I'm unbiased on all fronts. I mean, obviously I don't like Trump, but I don't like politics in general, folks. But ultimately, I do think it's a game worth understanding and having an intelligent analysis on. So I'm going to try to bring you that with this upcoming election madness. Here we go. Last few ones. Bill Weld, the Republican. You have to look into him because never heard of him. That's not true. I think I saw him on Fox once when I was cycling through. Because I do that, right? Got to check out what everybody's echo chamber is saying. All right, there's Marianne Williamson. That's a new name to me. And Andrew Yang. Another name I don't know. Both Democrats. Right, so gotta wrap it up. I'm way over time. Here I am, always admonishing myself for the same old problem. So as the madness kicks off, there's a lot to investigate. There's a lot to discuss. There's a lot to explore. And there's a lot to be wary of, folks. Regardless of party, I'm one of those folks that has maintained that, psyops are real, and they aren't exclusive to any one government, and we are surrounded by them. So there's going to be psychological interference on social media that targets the left, that targets the right, and that is coming from multiple parties, not just good old Putin. Okay? And if you really, really don't think that that's true, if you really believe that that's completely made up, I don't know what to tell you. That shit's been evidentiary to me since I was a kid. It's there. Memes aren't new, folks. Memes are a phenomenon that existed before the internet. We, as human beings, like to bundle up little packets of information and attitude and opinion, and then when they get to a certain place of stickiness, and by that I mean they easily are consumed by the mind and then re-sent out into the world, they get contagious. Ideas can be contagious. And when someone is savvy enough with, sophisticated enough in understanding of how that works, that natural phenomena of the human mind can indeed be manipulated, influenced, and outright hijacked. Okay, and let's be frank, folks. For those who think that the Russia interference thing is totally a hoax, politics itself is ideological echo chamber programming. They are psyoping you. The Democrats are the white hat good guys, knights in shining armor to their base, and the Republicans are God's chosen ones, with God's shining, glowing armor to their base, and the bad guys are everybody else. Even if you already knew that, take a moment to meditate with that shit and let it sink in. Let it sink in terms of how you relate to the world, right? And in terms of what 2020 can really be if we all organize, if we are of spiritual minds and hearts and energies, and we are in the process already of abdicating ideological constructs, then we can use the tools of nature and the tools of spiritual reality, the esoteric truths that are out there and might be at our disposal to various degrees and to, various abilities. We might be able to manifest not just political change, which is what we always do. We do that anyways by default. If we engage in the political system, we end up manifesting political change. Now, the thing is, the system is set up to be a pendulum echo chamber of political change that constantly pushes back on itself and is reaching new heights of extremism. And I humbly suggest to you that that is true around the world. I mean, look at Sri Lanka. Look at Myanmar, right? I like to point to them, not to mock them, not to judge them, but to go, isn't it fascinating that Buddhism got to the point of violent extremism and totalitarianism in its government? For those who think that it could never happen here at home, folks, that is what Trumptopia is. It's one of the stages of not growth. Well, I guess it is growth, right? Negative growth. Of gradual, that's the word I was trying to mispronounce just then, of gradual, subtle, almost subliminal growth into stricter and stricter forms of freedom oppression. Oppression through freedom. All right, I digress. Tip of the hat to, what's his name, right? He wrote that warning, and I guess some people took it as an instruction manual. Huxley. Was it Huxley, or was it the other guy? I don't know. They both were on the same, Venn diagram of where we are now in terms of literary, visionary, predictive texts. At any given moment, though, folks, we can abdicate the programming. Mind you, as I wrote recently to someone at Facebook, I think, no one escaped conditioning. That's the real tragedy. And that's why being self-righteous about my team over your team is also a real tragedy. We all underwent conditioning. We grew up under the influence of the conditioning that our parents grew up under, the influence of the conditioning that their parents grew up under, the influence of the conditioning of their parents. This has been going on for a really long time, folks. This most recent iteration of madness is just the most recent iteration of the madness. And as I've tried to share over and over again, we cannot fight it. We can heal it, which is even better than reorganizing it from within. But in order to be able to reorganize it from within at a pragmatic level, we have to be working on our own healing and the healing of the species. There I go, being redundant. All right. Thank you for listening, as always. Stay tuned for more episodes, because the really madness is the 2020 madness, the really wacky 2020 madness is just building, and it's about to get wackier, I'm sure. And at one level, it's just entertainment. So let's be entertained. At another level, though, it's an opportunity to manifest change. So let's start organizing around that, friends.
And that is the latest madness from behind the orange wall. Thank you for listening to GMT, a special segment of the Almost Daily Zencast. Stay woke, Trumptopia. Stay woke.